Will Rogers, American humorist, years ago said, there were two great blessings in life, love and labor. I experienced both of them when I put the key in the door here. And I hope to experience that a little today during this TED Talk on my favorite topic. I tell my students never start with a question, and that's why I added the sentence before this. Now the question. The people on the wall, what might they have in common? John F. Kennedy, actress Helen Mirren, President Reagan, Lindsey Vonn, skier, Moses Jonquil Deng, a former Lake Area Tech student of mine, and a dear departed friend of mine, Eric Tennis. Kennedy. In 1959, Nikita Khrushchev, the premier of Russia, at the United Nations in New York, took his shoe off and pounded on a table and said that Russia would bury the United States. In '60, Kennedy was elected. The speech after his inaugural speech, he said that the United States would land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Historians tell us we didn't have 85% of the technology it took for Neil Armstrong to walk on the moon and say, one small step for man, one giant leap forward for mankind. We didn't even know how to make Tang or the Fisher space pen. And yet Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Helen Mirren, Academy Award-winning actress, typical Brit, loves gardening. It's her passion, but she estimates she's on the road 340 days a year. She's currently in New York on Broadway in a play. What does this mean to us? I admire her not because of the awards she's gotten, but because she plants flowers and vegetables that she may never see blossom or bloom. She's got it, and you do too. Ronald Reagan stood on the same spot that Kennedy had when in 1961, Kennedy said to the German people at the wall, Ich bin ein Berliner, meaning I am one of you. In 1985, Reagan stood on that same spot and outstandingly said to Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of Russia, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And that is what is left of the wall today on that site. You'll notice the graffiti tribute, tear this wall down. He got it right. And that's a lot for a Democrat to say about a Republican in a TED Talk. Reagan had it, and it's already inside of you. Lindsey Vonn, World Cup quality skier and Tiger Woods' girlfriend. She has to ski down a hill with stamina and strength and power and vision to see 6 gates ahead at 75 miles an hour on ice and snow. 6 gates ahead. And if Lindsey thinks she's going to crash, she will. Like a former basketball player shooting baskets, I had to imagine the hoop was huge to make a basket. However, there's an added challenge to Lindsey. She has crashed twice. That's her left knee and her right knee in separate accidents post-surgery. And this winter, she came back to win the World Women's Downhill Ski Race. She's got it, and everybody in this room does too. Moses. I wouldn't have known about this except he gave a demonstration speech that lasted 20 minutes in my class. Those of you who are my students know the time limit is 2.5. But it was kind of a special speech. He talked about the country he had left twice, the Sudan. This is a lost boy. 2 civil wars killed most of his family. He was a lost boy in camps in neighboring countries. He barely survived himself. And he got to realize part of his dream on September 11th, 2001. As 2 jets hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon with a 3rd jet, he was on his way from Amsterdam to America, ultimately to come to my school. They turned the jet around. And yet he got here. He got 100% on the national test to become a citizen. And this winter, FAA granted him a pilot's license. Hoo-ah, Moses. And I say this because I picked a fellow student. You think that that might be a big deal? That's not the biggest deal. He said in his speech, the 20-minute speech, that he wanted most in all the world to go back to his native city of Pyongyang. He wanted to put a metal roof on the school so the children could go to school all day, even in the rain. He wanted to create a well in his town so that the girls could attend school too, because it was their assignment in that community to go get water for food and health twice a day. He raised $50,000 on his own. He put a roof on the school, he put a well in the town, and then when he had some money left, he built the rest of the school. Hoo-ah, Moses. You students here, you could do something big. He had it, and I suspect you do too. My dear departed friend Eric, he will be the rest of the story. 1999 South Dakota Handicapped Worker of the Year. He hated that word. By the way, you can't see his wheelchair in this picture. He preferred to say that people have limitations, not handicaps, not disabilities. And his favorite quote about that was, "Don't let your limitations limit you." More about him in a minute. I suppose I should define the topic that I have today. I'm a third of the way through this message, and it's about time. I see students in the back row going, "Get on with it." This is about optimism. It comes to the Latin word opt, meaning power. Optimism defined is expectation of something good, and it's in all of us. Let's see if we can play with this a little. A commercial from Prudential, a multi-billion-dollar international company, and it started running during the NCAA tournament 3 weeks ago. They surveyed hundreds of Americans about the past where they put yellow and blue marks on a board. Yellow was something good, blue was something bad. And then they asked them about the future. They were equal in describing the past, but for the future, yellow, good, outnumbered blue, bad, by 4 or 5 to 1. And by the way, in case your teacher might not be an optimist, imagine the task of getting permission to show that commercial in a TED Talk that could be published everywhere. They have a website. They have real people on the end of it, just like you and I, some of whom by luck might be an optimist too. It took 10 minutes. Thank you, Prudential. This is a picture of a fairy godmother drawn by my student, Paul Gable. I don't call it the fairy godmother anymore, it's the Gable godmother. And in optimism, she is not waiting out there for you to turn your pumpkin into some kind of coach. Optimism is taking action in anticipation of something good, and each of us can do that every day. In fact, you're going to hear this theme in every one of the TED Talks today, whether it's the miracle of flight or turning Monday into a great day, your spirit, virtually everything that we talk about today, you will hear this golden thread running through their speeches too. So sorry, folks, I'm now capturing your speech. Paul drew that because I couldn't show a Disney photo of the fairy godmother. Optimism is there's always a way. Sometimes the way is small. I'd like you to consider my backyard. 10 years ago, my dearest friend on earth, a biology teacher, went to my backyard and wasn't sure if they were my trees or the neighbor's trees. Being the biology teacher she was and interested in healthy things, she took a tree spike and pounded it into the ground on the tree on the right. And then my neighbors came out and wondered what was going on, and being a rather shy person, she quit. So the tree on the left was not nourished. What a difference one thing can make in our lives. One thing makes that difference. The tree on the right, by my estimate, is 35% taller and 100% healthier. One thing. One decision to come to Lake Area Tech, to not fear that speech, to attend a TED Talk. Amazing. Here's the part I promised. We're wired for this. I did a little research on this. There's a thing called the ventromedial cortex. Had to sound like a teacher today, didn't I? When it is severed, we can't think of positive things. If mine were severed, I couldn't think about the steak that's thawing in my refrigerator. I couldn't think about my friends coming for the weekend, a trip planned with my family. None of that would be possible. And by the way, because you're thinking about something positive right now, it means you have a healthy central medial cortex too. The trick is unleashing it. It's in the middle of the brain, and we are wired for success. All we have to do is picture it. Those of you who have played a sport and were successful know exactly what I mean. When you were successful, you pictured it. When you students were successful, you pictured it. And for you teachers or parents in the room, you do this all the time. A couple of historical examples. Thomas Alva Edison, most of us know, invented the light bulb. In fact, he promised that the city of Manhattan would be the most well-lit city on Earth in 2 years. Unfortunately, since the dawn of mankind, light was produced from heat and flame. Flame is unreliable, unsafe, and dirty. He lacked a socket for the light bulb, a vacuum bulb, a filament, and there were no wires generating electricity to the city of Manhattan. He and his team failed over 1,000 times. Edison said, "Failure is a very powerful teacher." This is perhaps why we never see Edison smiling in the pictures. And yet, in 2 short years, his team discovered everything it took to make the modern light bulb. And they ran the wires, and they lit Manhattan to make it the most beautifully lit city on Earth. That's optimism, especially in the face of lots of evidence that says this ain't working. He created Edison Electric to provide the power to his light bulbs. He ended up selling it. Its company, the company that bought it, is doing pretty well today. It's called General Electric. It's one of the biggest, healthiest companies on Earth. And I put in a picture of a modern turbine because they're the only ones who could invent that for NASA. Way to go, General Electric. Thank you, Thomas Edison. A more dramatic example, and I'm going to quote from you Moses' website. Darkness is required to see the stars. Big challenge is what people rise to. You may be the only student in your family to graduate from an institute of higher education. Good for you. That required optimism. Ernest Shackleton wanted to get a crew to serve on Endurance, to discover the South Pole. He took an ad in the London Times. Men wanted for dangerous journey. Long hours, bitter cold, slight chance of success, honor and recognition in the event of success. The following morning, 5,000 men stood opposite the door of the London Times, and he picked the best 18 of them. In the face of adversity and challenge, our ventromedial cortex says, let's go, let's try something. Let's be part of something that might be big, even if it starts as small as that pine tree in my backyard. I want to talk for a moment about testing. They did a famous test of C students. They all got the same grade on the test. They got 70%. They told half of the group, you guys over here, you got 70% right. Their scores went up. They told the other half, sorry, you got 70% wrong, and their scores went down. Apparently, outside influences are part of optimism too. And luckily, we can pat ourselves and each other on the back. Now, if only I had a copy of Time magazine, I could share something before, This month's Time magazine costs $14, which is a lot for a teacher. But I bought it to share with you today. In it, it describes a growing optimism about studying optimism in college campuses. Major schools in the Big Ten, the Ivy League, the SEC, the Big 12, everywhere they play basketball for millions, are adopting courses in optimism. I did a Google search for courses in cynicism and pessimism. There are none. I'll close by talking about my dear departed friend. I asked him once about why he wasn't bitter about living most of his life in a wheelchair and a quadriplegic. He could barely move his arm to guide his wheelchair around town. And I would say that there are thousands of young people in this community that got to meet him. As I said, he was the 1999 Handicapped Employee of the Year. He also had the best attitude, the most optimism, and perhaps the largest ventromedial cortex I've ever met in my life. He also had the highest emotional IQ of any human I've ever known. He could figure people out. I told him, Eric, I would never play poker with you. He once said that, in a moment of candor, that he didn't think there would be wheelchairs in heaven. And I hope he's looking down on this speech and saying, well, I got it right. But here's something I learned from him. I learned that it's very important to connect with people and to do it in a positive, optimistic way. The superintendent of schools here introduced me to Eric, I think it was about 15 years ago. And Eric was asked by the superintendent, Rick Milmer, said, how is it that you are always so happy? And Eric said, if I were not, who would be my friend? Optimism personified. By the way, when he passed on a gray day in November 5 years ago, at the funeral, we filled the largest church in Watertown to overflowing. And for those of you who like Facebook, there were 1,800 posts. We should be so blessed. We should be so lucky. When I think of him and optimism, my best model of optimism, I conclude with this quote that applies to him and each of you and me. It's from Alfred Lord Tennyson. The purpose of human is to strive, to seek, to find, and never yield.